Good evening. Let's start with where this lands, not where it began. Because what is happening right now between the United States and Europe is not theoretical anymore. It is not background noise. It is not diplomats trading carefully worded statements that disappear by morning. It is something sharper than that. European leaders are now openly preparing retaliation measures against the United States. Measures that are designed not just to respond, but to reach directly into what has long been America's greatest source of global leverage. And they are doing it because of tariffs. Specifically, the renewed threat that President Trump may impose additional tariffs on imports from the European Union, potentially as high as 25%. That number matters, but what matters more is what Europe is now willing to do in response. For years, the transatlantic trade relationship has been held together by a shared understanding. Disagreements, yes. Disputes, absolutely, but also restraint. This moment is different. European officials are now openly discussing the use of what they themselves call a trade bazooka. That is not a term invented by critics. That is the phrase being used inside Europe. Formally, it is known as the anti-coercion mechanism. It is a tool designed for one purpose: retaliation when a foreign power uses economic pressure to force political or policy concessions. Until now, that tool has existed largely on paper. Now it is being discussed as a live option. French President Emmanuel Macron has been among the most vocal advocates for activating it if the tariff threats become reality. And that matters, because France is not acting alone here. This is not one country posturing for domestic politics. This is the European Union, collectively, signaling that it is prepared to escalate. The potential targets of that escalation are not steel or aluminum. They are not agricultural exports. They are not symbolic goods. They are services, technology, finance. The parts of the American economy that do not arrive on ships, but dominate global markets. That is the shift. And when you hear European officials talk about this moment, you can hear that they understand the gravity of it. This is where things stop being abstract. That line, spoken quietly, captures it, because services are where the United States holds its biggest global advantage. American tech companies, American financial institutions, American digital platforms. These are sectors where Europe is deeply integrated with the US economy, and where retaliation would not be symbolic. It would be structural. European leaders have been careful in how they describe this. They are not announcing action yet. They are preparing. They are making clear that if tariffs come, they will not respond the way they used to. This is not about matching tariffs product for product. This is about changing the battlefield. And that is why this moment feels heavier than previous trade disputes. The anti-coercion mechanism allows the European Union to impose restrictions on access to its market, to limit business operations, to target services, and to apply measures that go far beyond traditional tariffs. It was designed with authoritarian economic pressure in mind. Now, Europe is openly discussing its use against the United States. That alone tells you how far this has moved. The official justification is straightforward. If one side uses economic power to coerce, the other side responds in kind. No editorializing required, no speculation, just a description of cause and effect. And yet, the implications are enormous. Because for decades, the US-Europe relationship has rested on the assumption that even when political leadership changes, the underlying economic partnership remains stable. This moment challenges that assumption, not with rhetoric, with planning. The European Union has not activated the mechanism yet. That point matters. This is preparation, not execution. But preparation itself sends a signal. It tells Washington that Europe is no longer content to absorb pressure quietly. It tells American companies that trade policy is no longer something happening at the edges of their business. And it tells the rest of the world that the transatlantic relationship is entering a more openly transactional phase. One European official described it this way: "You don't take this tool out unless you're ready to use it." That is not a threat. It is a description. And it is why this moment deserves attention. Because trade disputes often sound technical. Tariff schedules, percentage points, product categories. This one is about power, who has it, who is willing to use it, and how far they are prepared to go. We are still at the beginning of this sequence. No measures have been triggered yet. No restrictions have been imposed. But the lines are being drawn. And once they are drawn, they are very hard to erase. This is not noise anymore. That sentence hangs there because it is simply true. What matters next is how deliberately this is being handled. European officials are not rushing. They are sequencing. First comes the warning, then comes the framework. Only after that, action. And right now, Europe is squarely in the framework phase. The European Union is signaling that if President Donald Trump follows through on the proposed tariffs, Europe will treat that move not as a routine trade dispute, but as economic coercion. That distinction is critical, because under normal trade disagreements, responses are limited. They are proportional, they are narrow. But under the anti-coercion mechanism, the response is broader by design. It allows Europe to look beyond goods and into services. That includes American technology firms operating in Europe. It includes financial services. It includes access to markets that American companies rely on daily. Nothing here is accidental. The mechanism was developed precisely because Europe felt it lacked tools to respond when traditional trade remedies were insufficient. It was meant to be a last resort, and now it is being discussed out loud. The tariffs under consideration by the United States, potentially up to 25% on European imports, are the trigger point. European leaders are saying clearly that such tariffs would cross a line. Not because tariffs have never existed before, but because of scale and intent. From Europe's perspective, these would not be technical adjustments. They would be leverage. And leverage invites a response. One official described the moment this way: "At some point you stop pretending this is just policy." That line resonates because it explains the shift. For years, Europe absorbed trade pressure while emphasizing dialogue. This time, they are emphasizing readiness. The internal discussions within the European Union are focused on options, not announcements. Which sectors could be targeted? Which legal thresholds would apply? How quickly measures could be implemented if needed? Again, no speculation required. These are the mechanics of preparation. And what makes this moment different is that the preparation is no longer quiet. European leaders are speaking about it publicly. They are doing so in response to public tariff threats. That symmetry matters. The European Commission has been careful in its language. Officials stress that the anti-coercion mechanism is defensive, that it is designed to protect European sovereignty, that it is not punitive for its own sake. Those words are chosen deliberately, but the substance is unmistakable. If tariffs arrive, Europe is prepared to respond in a way that touches the core of American economic influence. This is why US services are central to the discussion. America's global strength is not primarily in exported goods. It is in platforms, in finance, in digital reach. European leaders understand that. They also understand that targeting services is a significant escalation, which is precisely why it is being held in reserve. One senior European figure put it plainly: "You do not signal this unless you are prepared for the consequences." Again, not a threat, a statement of readiness. It is also important to note what Europe is not doing. They are not announcing specific targets. They are not naming companies. They are not releasing timelines. That restraint is intentional. It keeps the focus on deterrence rather than punishment. The message is, escalation is avoidable, but it is no longer unthinkable. This entire dynamic underscores how trade tensions between the United States and Europe have deepened, not suddenly, but cumulatively. Each tariff threat adds weight. Each public statement narrows space. And now, Europe is making clear that it has tools it previously chose not to use. There is a quiet gravity in how this is unfolding. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just policy instruments being lifted from the shelf and examined carefully. This is not something you do lightly. That sentence carries the weight of the moment, because once these mechanisms are activated, reversing course becomes far more complicated. Businesses adjust, markets react, relationships recalibrate. Everyone involved understands that. Which is why this phase, preparation without execution, is so consequential. It is the moment where outcomes are still flexible, where decisions still matter, where restraint can still prevail. But it is also the moment where intentions are revealed, and Europe's intention right now is to be taken seriously. So this is where it settles, not with an announcement, not with an explosion of policy, but with a pause that carries weight. Europe has not acted yet. The United States has not finalized new tariffs yet, and still something fundamental has shifted. Because for the first time in this latest chapter of transatlantic trade tension, the European Union is openly preparing to respond in a way that reaches directly into the core of America's global economic strength. That is not rhetoric, that is structure. The anti-coercion mechanism exists as a legal framework within the European Union. It was designed, debated, and adopted with the explicit understanding that economic pressure can be used as a political tool. Until now, it remained unused. What we are seeing in this moment is not activation, but acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that the threat of tariffs, particularly at levels as high as 25%, is being interpreted by European leaders as more than a routine trade dispute. It is being interpreted as coercion. That classification changes everything. Because once a move is categorized that way, the available responses expand dramatically. The European Union as an institution is built on process. Decisions move slowly. Consensus is deliberate. Language is precise. When that institution begins publicly discussing its most powerful trade response mechanism, it is not improvising. It is signaling. And that signal is being sent not only to Washington, but to businesses, markets, and governments around the world. The message is simple. Europe is no longer willing to limit its responses to symbolic measures if it believes economic pressure is being applied deliberately. The focus on US services is central here. This is not incidental. Services are where American influence is most pronounced. They shape how money moves, how information flows, how companies scale across borders. By making clear that services are on the table, Europe is pointing directly at that influence. Again, no action yet. But the implication is unmistakable. This is why European leaders are choosing their words carefully. They emphasize that the mechanism is defensive. They stress that it is meant to deter, not to punish. Those distinctions matter, because escalation, once triggered, rarely remains contained. Trade retaliation does not exist in isolation. It affects investment decisions. It reshapes corporate strategy. It introduces uncertainty into systems built on predictability. Everyone involved understands that. Which is why the current phase, preparation without execution, is so consequential. It is the last space where outcomes are still flexible, where policy choices can still redirect the trajectory, where restraint can still prevail. But restraint in this context is no longer passive. It is conditional. The European Union is saying clearly that if additional tariffs are imposed, it will consider them grounds for a response that matches the scale and intent of the pressure applied. That response may include measures targeting American services sectors operating in Europe. That is not a forecast. That is a framework. And frameworks shape decisions. This moment also underscores how deeply trade tensions between the United States and Europe have evolved. They are no longer confined to specific products or industries. They now touch the architecture of the global economy. The transatlantic relationship has long been described as resilient, and it is. But resilience does not mean immunity. It means the ability to absorb shocks and adapt. What Europe is doing now is adapting its posture, moving from assumption to preparation, from quiet tolerance to conditional response. One European official summed it up with a line that feels almost understated in its significance. This is about credibility. That quote lands because it explains the entire dynamic. Credibility is what allows deterrence to work. If a response mechanism exists but is never considered, it loses force. By discussing it openly, Europe is restoring that force. Not to provoke, but to be taken seriously. The United States, for its part, retains its own leverage. Tariffs are powerful tools. They can reshape supply chains. They can alter trade flows. They can exert pressure quickly. But power in this space is not unilateral. It is relational. And what we are witnessing is a recalibration of that relationship. This is not about winners and losers. It is about boundaries, about how far one side can push before the other responds in kind. The coming weeks will matter, not because something dramatic must happen, but because decisions made or not made will determine whether this preparation phase becomes execution, whether warnings remain warnings, or whether mechanisms move from paper to practice. For now, the situation remains unresolved. Tariffs have been threatened, not imposed. Retaliation has been prepared, not deployed. And in that space between threat and response, there is still room for choice. But that room is narrowing. This is the point where clarity matters. That quiet observation captures the essence of the moment. Clarity about intentions, clarity about consequences, clarity about the costs of escalation. Europe has made its position clear. If economic pressure is applied, it is prepared to respond with tools that match the scale of that pressure. Not impulsively, not theatrically, but deliberately. And that, more than anything else, is what defines this moment. The process has begun, the lines have been drawn, and everyone involved now understands what is at stake.